Ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. Christian, I'm delighted to welcome you for the first time to the Qatar Economic Forum.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
We're going to cover a lot of ground. I'd like to begin, Christian, by talking about investing in technology. It's one of the things that we're here to do. Everybody wants to know about artificial intelligence, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Mistral, a French company involved in AI, recently raised money at a $6 billion valuation. OpenAI has tripled to $80 billion in 10 months. NVIDIA has a market cap of $2.3 trillion, and Microsoft, which is spreading its bets everywhere in AI, is at $3.1 trillion. Christian, is there any value left in AI?
This is a great question. I think the big speculation these days is, for the companies that are doing AI, like OpenAI, how do you value those companies? There's so much future potential, but we don't yet know what the future will look like. So that is extremely complicated, actually. But I feel that this is history repeating itself a bit. If you think back to when Google was a tiny company, and it went public at a wild valuation, everybody thought, it felt like the same. Who would have known that was a multi-trillion-dollar company today? So if I look away from the valuation question, I think there's no doubt that AI is changing the world of business, the society in many ways, and that there are lots of other angles into investing